The Atacama Desert stretches along northern Chile in a long, narrow band between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes. It is often described as the driest nonpolar place on Earth. In some areas, decades pass without measurable rainfall. The ground is a hardened crust of salt, dust, and oxidized minerals. Vegetation is sparse. Distances feel larger than they are, shaped by empty horizons and a steady, thinning light. Mining towns exist here because the desert contains copper, gold, and other ores that have drawn labor for more than a century. Roads cut straight lines through the landscape, linking ports to inland operations. From a distance, these routes appear temporary, as if they could be erased by wind. Near the city of Copiapó, the San Jose mine sits against a backdrop of low hills and exposed rock. It is not one of Chile's largest or most modern mines. Its entrances are utilitarian, built for function rather than permanence. Above ground, activity follows a routine shaped by shifts and schedules. Trucks arrive and leave. Workers descend and return. The desert absorbs sound quickly, and the mine blends into the surrounding terrain. On the surface, conditions are stable and predictable. The air is dry. The sky is clear. There is no immediate indication of danger. Life continues at a measured pace, governed by daylight and the expectations of another working day in the Atacama. The San Jose mine began operations in the late 19th century, part of a broader expansion of mining across northern Chile. Over time, ownership changed hands several times, and the mine developed a reputation for marginal productivity. By the early 2000s, it operated intermittently, reopening when mineral prices justified the cost. Its tunnels extended deep into the mountain, reaching approximately 2,300 feet below the surface, or about 700 meters underground. The mine was structurally complex. It relied on a spiraling access ramp rather than vertical shafts, allowing trucks to reach deeper levels. This design also meant that a single collapse could block the primary route in and out. Inspections had identified instability in certain sections, and there had been previous accidents, including fatalities. Despite this history, work continued. For many miners in the region, employment options were limited, and the San Jose mine offered wages that, while modest, were dependable when the mine was active. The men who worked there came from nearby towns and cities, including Copiapó and smaller communities scattered across the Atacama. Their backgrounds varied. Some had decades of experience in underground mining. Others were relatively new to the profession. Several had worked in other mines before arriving at San Jose, carrying with them practical knowledge of drilling, blasting, and tunnel maintenance. A few held supervisory roles, responsible for coordinating crews and monitoring conditions underground. Mining in Chile occupies a central place in the national economy, and for individual workers it often represents continuity rather than opportunity. Shifts are long. The work is physically demanding. The environment underground is controlled but never fully predictable. Heat increases with depth. Air circulation depends on mechanical systems. Rock integrity can change without warning. On August 5, 2010, a group of 33 men began their shift as they had many times before. Their tasks were routine: drilling, loading, and transport. There was no indication, at the start of the day, that this descent would differ from others. Equipment functioned as expected. Communication with the surface remained intact. The descent followed established procedures, guided by habit and experience rather than anticipation. As they moved deeper into the mountain, the desert above remained unchanged, unaware of what was about to occur beneath it. Shortly after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on August 5, 2010, a large section of rock gave way inside the San Jose mine. The collapse occurred near a junction along the main access ramp, several hundred meters above the working level. An estimated 700,000 metric tons of rock fell, filling the passage with debris and dust. The force of the collapse generated air pressure that traveled through the tunnels, knocking equipment from its place and extinguishing lights. At level 700, approximately 2,300 feet below the surface, the the miners felt the shock before they understood its cause. Dust filled the air, reducing visibility. Communication with the surface was lost. Initial attempts to move upward along the ramp were unsuccessful. The route they had used to descend was no longer passable. The men regrouped in an underground refuge located near their working area. The shelter was designed for short-term emergencies. It contained limited food, water, and ventilation support. Its purpose was to provide protection while a rapid evacuation or rescue was organized. It was not intended to sustain a large group for an extended period. Above ground, the collapse was detected quickly. Surface crews assessed the damage and began clearing debris. Early estimates suggested that reopening the ramp would be possible within days. This assessment proved incorrect. Additional rockfalls followed, further compacting the debris and making access from above increasingly dangerous. For the men underground, the situation shifted from disruption to confinement. There was no clear timeline. The primary exit was blocked. Secondary escape routes were either damaged or inaccessible. The depth of the mine and the scale of the collapse made self-rescue impossible. By the end of the day, the miners understood that they were trapped. The mine around them had become sealed. Above them, more than half a kilometer of rock separated them from the desert surface. The refuge at level 700 became the center of the miners' existence. It was a reinforced chamber carved into the rock, positioned near a work area where machinery and vehicles were usually stored. The temperature underground remained steady, higher than on the surface, averaging around 30 degrees Celsius. Humidity increased as ventilation systems failed, and condensation formed on walls and equipment. The air felt heavy, and movement required effort. The supplies inside the refuge were limited. Food consisted mainly of canned tuna, crackers, and milk. Water was stored in industrial containers. Under normal conditions, the shelter was stocked to support a small group for 2 or 3 days. With 33 men present, the calculations changed immediately. Rationing began on the first day. The miners organized themselves without formal instruction from above. A senior miner assumed a coordinating role, not through declaration, but through experience and acceptance. Tasks were divided. Some men monitored remaining equipment. Others managed food and water distribution. Cleanliness became a priority, not for comfort, but to reduce illness in an enclosed environment. Food was measured carefully. Each man received small portions at set times. In the earliest days, meals were reduced to a few spoonfuls of tuna and a biscuit, taken every 48 hours. Water was limited to a few sips per day. Physical activity was minimized to conserve energy and reduce dehydration. Lighting came from headlamps and vehicle batteries. To preserve power, lights were turned on only when necessary. Periods of darkness became part of the routine. Without natural light, time lost its usual markers. Days were counted deliberately. One miner kept a record, marking the passage of time on a surface inside the shelter. The men explored nearby tunnels cautiously. Some areas remained structurally sound. Others showed signs of stress, with fractured rock and fallen debris. They retrieved additional supplies where possible, including diesel fuel for generators and more water from equipment reservoirs. These excursions were planned and brief, balancing necessity against risk. Mental discipline became as important as physical management. Conversations were kept practical. Rumors were discouraged. There was no confirmed information from the surface, and speculation was considered destabilizing. When anxiety rose, the group returned to routine. Tasks, even minor ones, provided structure. As days passed, conditions deteriorated. Heat increased. Moisture accumulated. Some men developed skin infections and digestive problems. Medical supplies were minimal. Treatment consisted of rest, hygiene, and monitoring. Serious illness would have been difficult to manage, and this awareness remained unspoken but present. On the surface, rescue efforts expanded. Multiple drilling plans were proposed, but progress was slow. Underground, the miners were unaware of these developments. Communication lines had not been restored. The refuge remained silent. After more than 2 weeks underground, a drilling rig penetrated the mine near level 700. When the drill bit broke through into the refuge, it carried with it a note attached by the miners. Written in red ink, it stated simply that all 33 men were alive. The message was brief, factual, and precise. Communication was gradually established through narrow boreholes. Supplies began to arrive in small quantities: food, water, medical items, and letters from families. The arrival of these materials changed daily life but did not end confinement. The boreholes were too small for extraction. With contact restored, routines were adjusted. Food rations increased. A schedule was established to regulate sleep, work, and rest. Psychological support was provided from the surface through written messages and recorded audio. The miners were instructed to maintain order and continue conserving energy. Drilling for rescue progressed above, but the timeline remained uncertain. Underground, the men adapted to a prolonged stay. They organized spaces for sleeping, eating, and hygiene. Personal conflicts were addressed quietly. Privacy was limited, but boundaries were respected where possible. The mine environment remained constant. There were no sudden changes, only the steady passage of time. The men continued to wait, managing their resources and themselves, 2,300 feet below the Atacama Desert. As the weeks progressed, the physical strain of confinement became more apparent. Despite improved rations, bodies that had endured severe caloric restriction required time to recover. Weight loss was visible. Muscles weakened. Some miners experienced persistent fatigue that did not improve with rest. The heat and humidity remained constant, and the absence of airflow made even routine movement uncomfortable. Medical issues accumulated slowly rather than dramatically. Skin conditions worsened in the damp environment. Fungal infections spread between feet and hands. Digestive problems continued as diets shifted abruptly from near starvation to structured nutrition delivered through boreholes. Medical guidance from the surface helped manage these conditions, but treatment options were limited by space and supply. Psychological pressure increased in less predictable ways. The initial shock of entrapment had passed, replaced by a prolonged uncertainty that was harder to manage. The miners knew rescue plans existed, but they were also informed of setbacks. Drilling attempts failed when bits deviated or encountered unstable rock. Each failed effort extended the timeline without offering a clear alternative. Sleep patterns became irregular. Without natural light, circadian rhythms drifted despite imposed schedules. Some men slept for long periods. Others struggled with insomnia. Noise from drilling above, transmitted faintly through the rock, became both a reassurance and a reminder of distance. When drilling stopped, silence returned. The confined space amplified minor tensions. Differences in habits, beliefs, and coping styles surfaced. Leadership remained steady, but required constant attention. Decisions about space use, noise, and privacy were negotiated repeatedly. Disputes were addressed early, often mediated by group consensus rather than authority. Time blurred. Days were marked on calendars sent from the surface, but weeks felt indistinct. Milestones lost meaning. Birthdays passed quietly. External events were relayed selectively to avoid unnecessary distress. The focus remained on immediate routines: eating, cleaning, resting, waiting. Health monitoring intensified as the projected rescue date approached. Doctors expressed concern about the physical risks of extraction after prolonged confinement, including cardiovascular strain and psychological shock. Preparations were made underground to condition the miners for ascent, including exercise routines in confined corridors. Despite preparation, uncertainty remained the dominant condition. No rescue attempt of this depth had been completed before. The miners understood that survival until extraction did not guarantee survival during it. This awareness was acknowledged without discussion, folded into the routine of another day underground. The waiting continued, measured not in hours, but in endurance. On October 9, 2010, after weeks of drilling, one borehole reached the refuge with sufficient diameter to support an extraction capsule. The drilling plan that succeeded, known as Plan B, had progressed steadily after earlier attempts stalled. The shaft measured approximately 66 centimeters in diameter and extended more than 2,300 feet from the surface to level 700. Its completion marked the first time a continuous, human-sized passage connected the miners to the surface since the collapse. Preparation for extraction proceeded methodically. The capsule, later named Phoenix 2, was lowered for testing. It was narrow, reinforced, and designed to carry one person at a time. The ascent would take approximately 15 minutes per miner. Each man was briefed repeatedly on procedures, posture, and breathing. Medical protocols were reviewed. There was no margin for improvisation. Extraction began on October 13, 69 days after the collapse. The order of ascent was planned to manage risk. The first miners selected were those in better physical condition, intended to confirm the process. The weakest were scheduled later, once the system had proven stable. Each ascent followed the same sequence. A miner entered the capsule, secured restraints, and began the climb through the shaft. Communication was maintained continuously. At the surface, medical teams received each individual without ceremony. Assessments were immediate and controlled. The focus remained on health and stability. The final miner emerged on October 13, shortly before midnight local time. Underground spaces were left intact. Equipment remained where it stood. The refuge was sealed once more, now empty. The rescue concluded without fatalities. There were no deviations from plan, and no unexpected failures. The mine, having delivered its occupants back to the surface, fell silent again. In the weeks following the rescue, the San Jose mine was closed permanently. Investigations examined its structural failures, safety record, and regulatory oversight. The collapse was attributed to geological instability compounded by operational decisions. No further mining took place at the site. The 33 men returned to lives that were altered but not resolved by survival. Medical monitoring continued for months. Some experienced lasting physical effects. Others faced psychological challenges that emerged gradually, after public attention faded. Outcomes varied. There was no single trajectory that followed confinement of that duration. The incident prompted international review of deep mine safety practices. Rescue techniques developed during the operation were documented and adapted for future use. The event became a reference point in mining history, not for its drama, but for its coordination and restraint. Beneath the Atacama Desert, the tunnels remained. Rock settled. Equipment corroded slowly in the damp heat. The refuge at level 700, once a temporary shelter, became a closed space again, holding no record of the routines that sustained life there. The desert above continued unchanged. Wind moved across the surface. Roads remained. From a distance, there was no visible trace of what had occurred beneath the ground. The survival of the 33 miners did not alter the landscape. It added, quietly, to the human record of endurance under constraint.